Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for all of those that are joining for our third session today on the FSSC version 6 requirements. It's great to have you all. I don't know, here in Cape Town we're keeping quite cool, but it's quite nice to do work in the cooler weather. Yeah, this will be our last session on version 6. This is an introductory version, and yeah, I hope it's been helpful for everyone. But yeah, today is going to be quite a mouthful. It's the last 9 additional requirements, and there's quite a lot of new things here. I think last week was more just editing of the current stuff, but this week we're going to have a mountain full of new stuff. Before we get into that, I just want to introduce those of you that don't know Sirius. We are a food solutions company. We assist many different food companies with anything that they need help with. Our primary goals have been food safety management systems, assisting with compliance. And then we've expanded that to offer training. We are a CETA accredited approved training provider. We have a couple of CETA approved courses, accredited courses, and then we've got a host of other courses that haven't been accredited by CETA, but we are offering them under the same sort of management structure. So if you're needing training, let us know. We would gladly come and assist you. We also are able to provide personalized training if that's what you require. So we see ourselves as partners in businesses, and we'd love to partner with you to assist where we can. We're also involved with doing internal audits, new product development. We might assist you in developing a product or fixing a formulation that you may have, and in that we may be able to supply you batch pack ingredients. So we do supply ingredients as well. We can help with your labeling, your nutritional analysis, verification of whatever you do. So essentially we're a food solution business, and if you make food, we can be your solution. So if you have any questions, let us know and let us get serious about what you do so that we can assist you in any aspect. So if that is what you need, contact us on info@sirius.co.za or give me a shout on my cell phone number that's at the bottom there. These recordings will be on our website, and you'll be able to access that for quite some time. And the whole point of being on our website is that you can send this, if it's been useful to you, to other people who may need training on version 6 or just some sort of insight into version 6. So let's get into it. FSSC on the 1st of April, our lovely April Fool's joke, has created a new version 6. And that's what we're discussing today. So this is our last one, and we're going to go through the last 9 additional requirements and then have some discussions afterwards. So if you haven't done it already, go to the FSSC website, fssc.com, and under schemes FSSC 22000, you'll be able to download the documentation. So get the documentation for version 6, and within there you'll find a document explaining all these additional requirements and what's required for version 6. So we've been through 1 to 9 previously, and today we're going through from 10 to 18. We're going to look at transport, storage and warehousing, hazard control and measures for preventing cross-contamination, PRP verification, product design and development, health status, equipment management, food loss and waste, communication requirements, and requirements for organizations with multi-site certification. So we're going to get straight into it. If you want to follow us in the document, look at page 23 in the additional requirements or in that document. So this requirement, 2.5.10, is the transport, storage and warehousing all food chain categories. So anything within the food space, it's all categories that are prescribed, that's included here. And they've included the whole, not just storage and warehousing, but actually the transport of food, because food is obviously in storage during that transit. So section A remains the same as it did previously, other than it's now applicable to transport as well as storage and warehousing. The organization shall establish, implement and maintain a procedure and specified stock rotation system that includes FIFO principles in conjunction with the FIFO requirements. So obviously the big thing here is not first in, first out, but make sure your expired stuff is removed first. It's a big thing that the first expired, first out principle is also included, not just first in, first out. I think this is actually advantageous for people to implement, or organizations to implement, because we don't want to waste product, by using maybe the new stock before the expired stock is used. We want to get rid of expired stock and reduce food waste. For B, they're talking specifically for food category 0. Category 0 is animal primary conversion. So this clause B is merely for abattoirs and slaughtering. So in addition to the technical spec 22002-1, which is your PRPs for food processing, clause 16.2, the organization shall have specified requirements in place that define post-slaughter time and temperature in relation to chilling or freezing of the products. So this is all after slaughtering. How long does it take for your carcass to get down to 4 degrees Celsius in the case of chicken, and 5 degrees Celsius in the case of beef and pork. So this is just making sure that we manage the chilling time and the freezing time of the products. That is a regulatory compliance issue in South Africa. Remember, FSSC is a global requirement, but they're going to make emphasis on the specific chilling time to get the carcass down from carcass temperature, which is roughly what, 38 degrees Celsius, down to 4 degrees Celsius. Normally within a 24-hour period.
Understand this option of blend with either egg today, chicken to the contain.
Clause,
Oh, they made changes to that.
yeah.
So Krishiva added that again after the measurement.
Matthew, I think you muted yourself.
Sorry all, I was muted in the process. Technical glitch. We're back and functioning now. So sorry about that, I'll just cover that again. So clause C, the food chain category FI, in addition to PAS 221, FI is the retail, wholesale, and e-commerce. So something like Take-A-Lot or Giants or Pick n Pay or Woolworths. If you're a retailer, so not a primary producer, you must ensure that the product is transported and delivered under conditions which minimize the potential for contamination. So for argument's sake, if Pick n Pay would like to have an FSSC certificate for their organization, then they need to make sure that they are putting in measures to make sure that the transport and delivery is controlled to ensure prevention of cross-contamination. Then section D, where transport tankers are used, the following shall apply in addition to clause 824 of ISO 22000. Organizations that use tankers for the transportation of their final product shall have a documented, risk-based plan to address transport tank cleaning. It shall consider potential sources of cross-contamination and appropriate control measures, including cleaning, validation. Measures shall be in place to assess cleanliness of the tanker at the point of reception of the empty container prior to loading. So this is very much for bulk transportation. We might not get that from from secondary manufacture into retail, but a lot of our primary manufacturers may do it. So if you've got a tanker of milk or a tanker of oil or whatever raw material you have, we're talking final product at that point within the value chain. I suppose I've noticed in Checkers, certainly in the Western Cape, they've got honey stations. Honey stations are coming probably in some form of tanker. I don't know how they manage it, but this is for bulk offloading. For organizations receiving raw material in tankers, so when you receive a raw material as a manufacturer, the following shall be included in the supplier agreement as a minimum to ensure product safety and prevent cross-contamination. Tanker cleaning, validation, restrictions linked to prior use, and applicable control measures relevant to the product being transported. So effectively, we're making sure that the transport of bulk material that ends up in your big bulk tanks, whether you're at a factory or maybe you're retailing bulk products out of tanks, that the quality of the tankers and the quality of the vessels the tankers are getting distributed in is suitable. So moving on to the next additional requirement number 11, hazard control and measures for preventing cross-contamination. This is applicable to all food chain categories, excluding F2. F2 is in the whole retail space, e-commerce trading space. So regarding hazard control and measures for preventing cross-contamination, clause A, for food chains B3, C, and I. So they've included B3 and C in this requirement in version 6. C is applicable to every single one of category C. So category C is all of food processing. The following additional requirements applies to ISO 22000 2018 clause 8513. The organization shall have specific requirements in place where packaging is used to impart or provide a functional effect on food. Note that that's a very broad statement. That is a very, very broad statement, and it doesn't tell you what those specific requirements are. You're going to have to understand your packaging and understand your specific requirements. But we need to put in programs in place to prevent any sort of, well, to make sure that everything's functional, that the packaging is functional for any packaging where you're creating a functional effect. So something like modified atmosphere packaging, where we may be limiting oxygen permeability or moisture permeability or some sort of function, maybe it's a retortable pouch. We need to make sure that those pouches are suitably designed and applicable to this clause. For food category C0, C0 is the abattoirs. The organization shall have specified requirements for an inspection process at leerage and or evisceration to ensure animals are fit for human consumption. Again, this is often a legal requirement in South Africa, so we probably have it in place already. However, one must put emphasis that the inspection is actually appropriate at the leerage and evisceration steps in slaughterhouses. For section C, for food category D is for the feed and animal food, processing of feed and animal food. The organization shall have in place procedures to manage the use of ingredients and additives that contain components that can have an adverse animal health impact. Again, a very broad statement. One will have to analyze the components that you do put into your feed, and you'll have to make sure that you put procedures in place to make sure that those components are managed very tightly. For category D, in terms of hazard controls, all food category chains excluding F2, so everything excluding F2, the following is required. The organization shall have a risk assessment in place to determine the need and the type of foreign body detection equipment required. So we're being very specific here. If you have a metal detector, you have to have specific risk assessment in place to determine the need for this. Where the organization deems no foreign body detection equipment is necessary, justification shall be maintained as documented information. So if I determine that I need a metal detector or I need an X-ray machine, I must keep the documents on file. I'm very surprised this is in here because typically that's all described in hazard analysis. But we need to just bulk up the documentation requirement and make sure we can really justify everything within our HACCP portion of the whole system. Foreign body detection equipment includes equipment such as magnets, metal detectors, X-ray equipment, filters, and sieves. So if we don't have any foreign object equipment when we might need it, we have to justify why it's not needed. So an event like this is really just a big statement saying that we need to put a lot of justification in place. We need to document the justification. We have to have a lot of reasons why we use or don't use it. So our hazard analysis must justify it's not necessary, and we so documented information for that. And if we've chosen to use it because of a hazard analysis, we need to document why we've done that, and we need to explain it. A documented procedure shall be in place for the management and use of equipment selected. So this is all about procedures on how we manage and use it. So it's in excess of just validating having a metal detector. Again, I think a lot of information has been there. So if you've decided to have maybe a X-ray machine as a CCP, we often have a lot of this documentation in place. Maybe if it's not a CCP, we're going to have to bulk up the documentation. But at the end of the day, this clause D, whether we have magnets, metal detectors, filters, whatever we might have, we're going to have to just expand on the documentation justifying why we have it and how we use it and how we're going to manage that equipment. The organization shall have controls in place for foreign matter management, including procedures for the management of all breakages linked to potential physical contamination. So again, if we've got a breakage of hard plastics or glass or metal, we have to have specific procedures in place with how to manage this. For me, this seems very similar to what we've had previously under foreign object control. I think the emphasis here is just making sure everything is documented. So documenting these procedures, having records for making sure that when something does go wrong, we've got it in control. So again, bulking up on what we have to manage foreign matter management and breakages. Section 12, PRP verification. This is for food chains B3, C, D, I, and K. Again, C, most of you are involved with all forms of processing of food. The following requirements will be necessary. The organization shall establish, implement, and maintain routine site inspections and PRP checks to verify that the site, internal and external, so we're looking at outside and inside the factory, the production environment and processing equipment are maintained and in a suitable condition to ensure food safety. The frequency and content of the site inspection checks shall be based on risk with defined sampling criteria and linked to the relevant technical specifications. So again, they're just forcing us to do site inspections. Previously, the FSSC audit did not require that. They said based on risk, manage your risks. We are forcing that site inspections are routinely done based on risk. It doesn't mean that it has to be done monthly. It doesn't mean that it has to be done daily, but where the risk is high, we're going to do it more frequently. Where the risk is a bit lower, we'll do it less frequently. And that needs to be justified. We can't just sort of make up a risk. We have to understand why we've changed that. This is a very similar, well, this is the same clause as version 5.1. They've just incorporated this with category B3, which you would find in our first lecture. Section 13, or additional requirement 13, product design and development for food categories, food chain categories B3, C, D, and the rest. You can see most of the requirements are the same as version 5.1. They have included product design, not just product development, but it's the same NPD process. When we are doing NPD, a product design and development procedure shall be established, implemented, and maintained for new products and changes to product or manufacturing process to ensure safe and legal products are produced. This shall include the following. We need to evaluate the impact of the change on the system, taking into account any new food hazards introduced and updating the hazard analysis accordingly. That's stock standard. We understand how that works. considering the impact on the process flow for the new product and existing products and processes. It's all about process flow management, updating hazards and hazard analysis, updating the system, understanding any additional resources and training that may be needed, what other equipment and maintenance requirements are needed. So they're really just specifying very specific needs that we need to consider when we create a new product or process. The need to conduct production and shelf life trials to validate product formulation and processes are capable of producing a safe product and meet customer requirements. And then they've added a process for ongoing shelf life verifications shall be in place at a frequency based on risk. So what this means is that we need to do something regularly, ongoing, all the time. One doesn't just do a shelf life analysis when you develop the product, but you actually verify it from time to time. The best way to do this is you may do monthly testing on final product. Alter those products once directly after production, once at the end of shelf life, so that we're regularly verifying it. If you need some help with this and designing a micro sampling plan, give us a shout, give me a call. We can get in there and assist you. But essentially, we can't just rely on testing product on the day of manufacture or the one day after manufacture. We have to test product at the end of shelf life as well, so that we've got some sort of scientific verification that the shelf life is still attainable. Obviously, when we may be looking at lower risk products, powders and things like that, microbiological risk is not necessarily an issue. This frequency is based on risk, so you might not necessarily do it, test it daily or weekly or whatever, in a low risk environment. But we also want to incorporate sensory and organoleptic testing. It's not just a microbiological thing. It's not just a shelf life based on this product expiring. It's also the organoleptic status of this. So even if it's a low risk product, we want to analyze it, maybe less frequently, but we need to analyze it to verify the shelf life is still sufficient. Where ready to cook product is produced, so something that needs to be cooked again before you can consume it. The cooking instructions provided on the product label or packaging shall be validated to ensure food safety is maintained. So validation studies of your cooking instructions is a vital component of this. It means you have to have a documented validation study. You must manage, for instance, your core temperatures and the time of cooking. If you say it needs to go in the microwave to be cooked, you must justify what that is. We know we've got different powers of microwaves. We need to select the cooking instruction that best represents the product that we're going to use, and we need to double check that actually if you cook it the way we say you cook it, that it will in fact be safe. So normally when we talk cooking, we're looking at it holding it above 72 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes. And so that's generally what we need to do. But again, to validate that, you must understand your product. What is the fat composition? What is the protein composition? What is the heating requirements like? And you might have to get into microbiological modeling to understand how your bacteria, something like Listeria or something like that, Listeria is one, often you look at the thermophilic spore formers and you see them in terms of thermal processing. So if we want to get technical with that and setting up a validation program, let us know. We can definitely assist you with that. But validation of cooking instructions is a prerequisite now. So if anyone's making any products that need to be cooked, we need to validate those instructions, and they obviously have to be instructions of cooking on the product. Right, clause number 14, health status, food chain category D. This is only for category D. There's been no changes since 5.1. The organization shall have a procedure to ensure that health of personnel does not have an adverse effect on the feed production operations. Subject to legal restrictions in the country of operation, employees shall undergo medical screening prior to employment in feed contact operations, unless documented hazards or medical assessments indicate otherwise. Additional medical examinations, where permitted, shall be carried out as required at an interval defined by the organization. So this is only obviously for feed products. and it's very specific what needs to happen. Equipment management. This is a new additional requirement, number 15, regarding the equipment in all food categories excluding F2, which is your trade and e-commerce. In addition to ISO 22000 clause, you firstly have to have a documented purchase specification in place, which addresses hygienic design, applicable legal and customer requirements, and the intended use of the equipment, including product handled. The supplier shall provide evidence of meeting the purchase specifications prior to the installation. I just want you to let that sink in. This is quite a mouthful. It means for every piece of equipment that we buy, we need to create a piece of paper, which is a specification for that equipment. And that equipment has to address hygienic design, legal and customer requirements, intended use of the equipment, and how the product is handled. And you need to have evidence that the equipment that you purchase will meet that requirement before you install it. You can't just go to Macro and buy something. You've got to get the spec first. This is going to be one hell of a requirement to meet. I think it's going to be a big adjustment. There's going to be quite a lot of work there. I'm not 100% sure how the auditors are going to interpret this, because from an audit perspective, this is a new requirement. We've got a lot of old factories with old equipment. Can we just create this for the past? Is this for equipment going forward? I'm not sure how the auditors are going to interpret it. It's a bit unfair to ask us to implement this for everything that's working in a factory that's already 10 years old. However, if you're going to buy a new piece of equipment, we need to put some thought into that piece of equipment and making sure it complies with that clause. Then clause B, again, regarding managing your equipment, one needs to establish and implement a risk-based change management process for new equipment and or any changes to existing equipment, which shall be adequately documented, including evidence of successful commissioning. Possible effects on existing systems shall be assessed and adequate control measures determined and implemented. So when we're changing equipment, when we're getting new equipment, we need to assess the risk, and all of this needs to be documented. We have to have proof in the form of documentation that this has successfully been commissioned, that this new piece of equipment has gone in there and that everything's sorted. We can't just throw a piece of equipment in and then hope for the best. We've got to plan everything, and we've got to make sure that it is working appropriately, and all of that evidence needs to be documented. I think this equipment management section is quite a handful, and some creativity is going to be needed within the system to make this make sense in a simple manner, but quite a lot of work is going to be needed to ensure that we meet these requirements within organizations. The 16th additional requirement regards food loss and waste. This is a new additional requirement, and it's applicable for all food categories excluding category I. So in addition to clause 8 of ISO 22000, we have to have a documented policy and objectives detailing the organized strategy to reduce food loss and waste within the organization and the related food supply chain. So it has to be documented. We have to have a strategy. We have to commit to reducing food loss and food waste. We need to, once we've committed to a strategy and put objectives in place, have controls in place to manage products that are donated to non-profit organizations. So you can't just give your waste away. We have to have controls in place to make sure that we only donate sufficiently safe product when we donate it to organizations or employees or other organizations, and ensure that these products are safe to consume. So we can't just hand out anything. We have to have predetermined, predefined controls in place. We need to manage surplus products or byproducts intended as animal feed food to prevent contamination of these products. So if you are giving all your waste to the pig farmer, which is a very common occurrence that I found in South Africa, we have to have controls in place to prevent contamination. You can't just give everything to your pig farmer. You can't give floor sweepings to your pig farmer. We have to make sure that what we're giving to our pig farmer, because it becomes animal feed and food, we have to make sure that it's not contaminated in the process. So controls of our waste, the way a lot of companies currently are doing it, are going to have to be tightened in this regard. And then these processes that we make shall comply with all the applicable legislation, kept up to date, and not have a negative impact on food safety. So that's quite a handful. We have to just make sure that we've got a lot more tighter controls on our waste management process protocol within our food safety management system. Right, clause number 17. It's also a new additional requirement. In addition to ISO 22000:2018, the organization shall inform the certification body within 3 working days of the commencement of the events or situations below and implement suitable measures as part of the emergency preparedness and response procedure. So this is all regarding emergency preparedness and response. We are required to notify certification bodies. A, if there's a serious event that impacts the system, legality, or the integrity of the certification, including situations that pose a threat to food safety or certification integrity as a result of a force majeure, natural or man-made disaster, war, strike, terrorism, and crime. So if something big happens that may impact the safety of your product or the integrity of the certification, you have to, within 3 days, notify the certification body. If there is a serious situation where the integrity of the certification is at risk, or where the foundation can be brought into disrepute, these include, but are not limited to, public food safety events. If you are a polony manufacturer and you have, and the country has a listeriosis outbreak relating to polony, you are required to notify your certification body that there was a polony outbreak, or a listeriosis outbreak. It's public food safety events. Actions imposed by regulatory authorities as a result of a food safety issue, where additional monitoring or forced shutdowns of production is required. So if a regulatory authority has come to your premises and said to you that you need to stop producing, there's a food safety incident, you have to notify the FSSC. Just regarding public food safety event, it is if you implicated in it. So if you've decided to do a recall or a withdrawal, it's not if someone else has, it's if you have. Then legal proceedings, prosecutions, malpractice or negligence, and fraudulent activities and corruption. So if your organization has been involved in something like that within their supply chain that may impact food safety, you need to notify the FSSC. I would recommend that this is all built into our communications protocol, so that that's where you'd address this. All right, clause number 18. The big thing about clause number 18 is this is not required for category C. It's only required for food categories categories E, F, and G, not A and not C. So if you're within E, F, and G, there needs to be this is all about multi-sites. This is about big organizations. They normally have a central function. Central means they've got a head office somewhere and multiple factories. So if you have a whole lot of food factories that have a head office, this is not applicable to them. They're not multi-site. Each food factory is considered a site its own and has to have all the requirements in place. But if you have an organization which is multi-site and it falls within category E, F, and G, The central function, the management of the central function shall ensure that sufficient resources are available and that the roles, responsibilities, and requirements are clearly defined for management, internal auditors, technical personnel reviewing internal audits, and other key personnel involved in the food safety management system. So that's all about defining who does what and what they need to do. And then when you have some sort of big multi-site certification, your internal audit requirements are very specific. So in addition to ISO 22000, the organization must adhere to the following clauses. An internal audit procedure and program shall be established by the central function covering the management system, central function, and all sites. The internal auditors shall be independent from the areas they audit and be assigned by the central function to ensure impartiality at site level. So the sites can't audit their own work. The management system, centralized function, and all the sites shall be audited at least annually or more frequently based on the risk assessment. I think that's generally a very good thing with internal audits anyway, but annual audits is the minimum requirement. And the effectiveness of the corrective action shall be demonstrated. So if there is a corrective action required, we need to make sure that it's implemented and effective. The internal auditors shall meet at least the following requirements, and this shall be assessed by the certification body annually as part of the audit. So if you are assigned to be an internal audit for a big company with multi-site audits and a central function, you need to have 2 years full-time work experience in the food industry, including 1 year at the organization. So it's got to be an internal auditor that is internal and has worked for the organization. These are good principles that we should be implementing throughout our internal audit programs. In terms of education, completing a higher education course or in the food industry, or in the absence of a formal course, have at least 5 years work experience in the food production or manufacturing, transport and storage, retailing, inspection or enforcement areas. So you either must be trained formally or you need to have 5 years work experience as an education. In terms of training, if you're going to be doing the internal audits, for FSSC 22000 internal audits, the lead auditor shall have successfully completed a food safety management system, quality management system, or FSSC 22000 lead auditor course of 40 hours. You have to have done a 40-hour course. Other auditors in the internal audit team shall have successfully completed an internal auditor course of 16 hours, covering audit principles, practices, and techniques. The training may be provided by the qualified lead auditor or through the external training provider. And number 3, the scheme training covering at least ISO 22000, the relative prerequisite programs based on the technical specs, and the FSSC additional requirements, and that must be a minimum of 8 hours. Clause D, internal audit reports shall be subject to a technical review by a central function. So if we do an internal audit at one of the sites, it has to go to the central area and go through technical review. This must include addressing the non-conformities resulting from the internal audit. Technical reviewers shall be impartial. They shall have the ability to interpret and apply the FSSC normative documents and have knowledge of the organization's processes and systems. So you can't give it to anyone. The person needs to have intimate knowledge with the FSSC normative documents as well as what the organization does. So that's normally someone that's been working there a while. They probably should have the work experience and education at a minimum of what an auditor has, and probably have a little bit more experience within the business and be in a slightly more senior position. And lastly, the internal auditor and technical reviewers shall be subject to annual performance monitoring and calibration. Any follow-up actions identified shall be suitably actioned in a timely and appropriate manner by a central function. The big thing is the head office and the central function is going to drive the closing out and the addressing of the non-conformances that would be identified as an additional requirement. That is quite a mouthful. I don't think many attendees here are having to deal with multi-site audits. However, obviously we may have people watching these videos later. It might help one or two of you, and I think in general the principles talked about here, if you are within a normal organization, could also be applied. It's not mandatory, but it's a good idea to look at them and see where we can use them and implement them. So in terms of, we've gone through the additional requirements here. I'm going to just talk about one or two more things, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions. So when we go onto the FSSC website, firstly, fssc.com. If you are wanting to download the scheme documents, you click on schemes, and you go to the scheme tab here using the drop-down menu. At this point, you can download the different scheme documents. If you click on version 6, you can literally just press download and it will download into your download folder. If you're wanting to download or get some more information, I think this information is what came up in a question last week. We can go to the scheme FSSC 22000, and there's a section here called guidance documents. These guidance documents will be updated a little bit later with some other information, but currently there's guidance documents for environmental monitoring, food fraud mitigation, food defense, food safety culture, transport tank cleaning, and then a high-level overview. So these guidance documents, we must understand that a guidance document is trying to assist us to implement something that meets the additional requirements. The guidance document is not in its own right an additional requirement. The requirement is what we've been through. And we must remember that the FSSC is open to interpretation unless there's a clause that is very specific. So when it's open to interpretation, we must understand that we need to meet it. If it says we must assess the risk, we must come up with a model to assess the risk. And with environmental monitoring, firstly, you can click on here to download. Very simple, goes to your download folder. You can either download it or print it, opens up as a PDF. And to use this, we can go down and look at guidance for implementation. So we had a question the other day about zoning. And this is all about, when you read here, it says to assist with the implementation of the requirements. It doesn't mean you have to do this. It means this is here to assist you. If you do it like this, you most likely will comply because it's a good assistance, but it's to assist. If you feel that you can do it in another way, with methodology that you can substantiate, that makes logical sense, that is okay. It's your system. But following these guidelines is a very good practical way to achieve the intended results and to have something. So specifically here, we were talking about our zones of cleaning. So when we're doing environmental monitoring, we're going to do zones. I normally think of it like a bit of an onion. So the center of an onion is a small, tiny little zone. That might be considered your food contact surfaces, and you can specify your food contact surfaces. Zone 2 is non-food contact. So as a result, you're sort of saying that when I test food contact, I'm probably going to do that more frequently. I'm going to make sure I put emphasis on food contact because that's what the contamination point. Whereas zone 4, which might be remote non-food contact surfaces outside of the processing range, outside of your processing area, we're not going to do swabs in the washing rooms. We might do some sort of verification in the monitoring process there, but it's not nearly going to have the same intensity as zone 1. So they've specified zoning, they sort of describe zoning, but what I want you to remember is that they say that this is to assist with the implementation. If you can identify points in a different way, in your hazard analysis or using other methodology which you might find, you must substantiate the methodology, but you don't have to use this methodology. Although I would strongly encourage that all of you also download all these guidance documents, environmental monitoring, food fraud, food defense, because this is going to give us a brief overview and understanding of the requirements that the FSSC thinks is necessary. So again, food fraud, it goes into a good understanding and explanation of food fraud, what the requirements are, and then what they suggest we do to implement some sort of strategy to manage the requirements. So I just wanted to cover that with you because I think it's important that we make sure that we know where to find information, and yeah, that hopefully that helps you. Hopefully that helps. But I think if anyone's got questions, now's the time to ask your questions. I'd love to answer your questions if you'd like us to help you. And if you think that you need some more structured assistance, please give us a call. The number's at the bottom there, or give us an email and we'll get back to you to assist where we can. Thanks. Guys, any questions? You can use the chat function to give us some questions. Right, the first question regarding the metal detector derogation. What would you use as justification against not having a metal detector within process? Would it be past complaints and foreign object status or just a risk assessment? Wow, jump straight into it. That's a fun one. I don't know what I should say in public. So metal detection needs to be based on risk. The reality is depending on your process, one needs to look at the risk of metal being in your product. If you are in an organization which uses metal in such a way that there is a higher risk, a metal detector may be the best option to eliminate it. I'm going to think of two examples. One example would be something like in a bakery, you're going to sieve flour. You sieve flour not because you want to get something out of it, but you want to break the flour down. Sometimes there's a bit of clumping in a flour. You want to have fine flour, but those sieves break. You know, they're very well, they're not very flexible. They're very fragile and they break quite easily. So the likelihood of a piece of metal coming off the sieve and going in the process is quite high. And then what's the chances of you getting it out? So will an integrity check work? If you're a great company with a great food safety culture and you do religious inspections and you know which flour went through that sieve and you can isolate that batch of product before it goes out because your integrity checks, maybe you do it daily, so you checked it in the morning, it was perfect. You checked it in the evening, it was broken. And so you've isolated all the product that was manufactured with that sieve, and you can throw it away or you can send it somewhere that it can go through a metal detector before being sent out. You have to be certain that you find that piece. Then an inspection is justified, it can work. But often what happens is the food safety culture in our business is maybe not what it should be. We cannot necessarily identify in which product that was, in which case this integrity check is not a process which will eliminate the hazard. If the integrity check cannot be guaranteed, then the risk of the metal still being in that product, even though we've done integrity check, could be high. And that may justify the metal detector. So it all comes down to your likelihood of severity of having the metal in the product afterwards. And it's coming down to honesty when you ask that question. I once worked in a chicken abattoir, and we had a line that was manufacturing for one of our big chicken sellers. And we had a blade just shattered, and they've got a whole lot of automated blades. Now we didn't know where the blade went. All I know is we picked up pieces of the blade and one of the pieces was missing. Where was it? Well, it could be in one of the chicken boxes that went through the gyro freezer. So we had about 2 hours worth of chicken that we had to put on hold. and we had to put it all through a metal detector again. So in that instance, even when a blade shatters, like, you have to have these processes in place to stop the line, to isolate the product, to check the product again. If those processes are in order, and you can guarantee that you won't have the metal contamination, well, then we can probably justify not having a metal detector. But it's really process specific. So I think, Siobhan, if you need help with this decision, give us a shout. We can maybe look at your specific needs in its own right. But yeah, you need to look at it within your own environment, with the risks that you have, within the culture that you have, to justify that. Ish. There's a thing called customer requirements. The next question is, what about when a retailer forces you to have a metal detector? Should they justify why it is needed? No. A retailer can do what they like. A retailer may require a metal detector because they require specific control. Why? They might not trust the food safety culture. They might not trust that every single day, for every single minute, you will have 100% control on your metal in your facility. In which case, they're well within their right to demand it. It's called a customer requirement, and customer requirements is something that you negotiate with your customer. If a retailer decides that they don't want to negotiate with you, well, then that's just the cost of doing business with them. You can argue if you want, you can get all technical if you want, but now you've got to manage the relationships. And in those instances, there's a reason they're requiring it. So I would say, before you get up in arms about arguing with a retailer, you need to understand the requirements and don't ask for a specific justification. Sometimes they would just like you to have a metal detector because then they are certain that every single product is going through a metal detector and identifying the metal. Regarding metal detection, though, make sure you are testing for the right metal. Some metal detectors can only identify certain types of metal, and all metal detectors can only pick up certain sizes. There are sizes that are smaller than what it can pick up. So again, the specification of the metal detection is very important. So make sure you've got the spec as per the equipment additional requirement. We need to make sure that we can control that. Great. Are there any other questions? Shoot. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So I'm going to encourage you all to, if you would like to maybe have questions answered. I think this has been quite a fun webinar, and we'll keep you all on our mailing list. I do want to plan a question and answer session from time to time. Maybe, I don't know if the Thursday is the best, but Thursday afternoons might be our webinar date, and maybe we can open it up once a month or so that we can do a question and answers session. But if you feel that you need a question answered, or maybe you need some assistance with your food safety system, with implementing these requirements or any other issues, give us a shout, give us an email to info@serious.co.za, or go to our website, fill in our contact form, serious.co.za, and we'll be able to respond to your questions directly, and we'll also be able to assist with any needs that you have. So yeah, thank you all for coming. It's been a very well supported webinar. I hope it's given you an understanding of what the requirements are and where to find information. And yeah, good luck on your journey with implementing this. It's going to be quite a lot of work. We are also working collectively on sort of drafting up how we're going to interpret it and how we're going to package these additional requirements. And I think our sort of offer to the industry is that we're going to do the base work, And maybe by doing the base work, you guys can benefit from us assisting you. It's going to take, once we've got our head around it, it's going to be a lot quicker for you to implement a system with us helping you than you having to battle through this all yourself. So yeah, if you are needing assistance, let us know, and we'll be in touch. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending the webinar. We really appreciate it, and may you go well until we speak next time. Thanks very much.